Mixing with Mike plugin of the week comes from Tone Projects Basslane Pro. This is a new release from Tone Projects, as is most of their stuff, mastering grade, and this is a killer plugin. Essentially, this plugin is designed to give you the ability to control low end. So it's not just about monoing up low end; you can also expand low end, and it gives you a lot of very unique controls. Mostly what people deal with today on the mastering end of things is dealing with filters, either filters on the side to sort of limit the amount of low frequency energy so that the center image can be a little bit more solid, clean up mud, or you're dealing with some form of monoing the signal where you're merging the signals that are left and right down to the center as a way of creating monocompatibility. Monocompatibility is still an important thing, and while most people are listening through headphones and streaming services where that doesn't matter, there are a lot of consumer products, particularly when you get to things with subwoofers and stuff, which are almost exclusively mono in all consumer devices, and all these little, small localized, single or dual speaker thing that's all close together. So the low end is generated through some kind of a sub. It all ends up getting mono. And what can happen is if you have too much antiphase information going on in the low frequencies, then you can end up with issues of it merging and disappearing, right? Or canceling each other out to greater or lesser degrees. So to maintain the integrity, this plugin kind of does a deep dive on those types of things, and is also important for things like cutting vinyl records and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Clubs, right? Mixing for clubs, and people who do that exclusively know that sometimes the systems in a lot of clubs are just completely mono, not just mono below 400 hertz or whatever would be typical. So let's do a deep dive here. Everything starts up in the top right here. So we have an on-off switch here. So this is effectively our bypass for the whole plugin processing. And then you select the mode. So the mode tells you whether it will operate in linear phase or in real time, which is kind of a low level kind of phase, right? So it's not, you're going to get some rippling and things like that working in that mode. So essentially when you're operating the filters, how do you want them to operate? So for a mastering grade thing, you're going to get some latency by operating in linear phase. You live with that on the mastering side of things. Now, when we get right to it, everything centers around a meter here, right? So we have the meter. It has 5 lanes here, and you can change the numbers, right, to make them or scale them to be whatever you want. I think it stops out at like 450 or something like that in terms of the hertz, in terms of this last crossover. But it will show you the phase correlation left and right. And you'll see 2 lines. You'll see a white line. That'll be where the primary signal is, and then you'll see all of the dancing around stuff, which will be kind of the antiphase information or other phase information. You'll see this kind of move around or dance around. So I'll just kind of show you a little bit of it.
The way you looking, I didn't notice till then. Who you fooling?
Right, so you could see when these red lines appear on the outside that there is information that's appearing that is actually antiphase that's going out. So part of the reason why I brought this in as a project example, so we can kind of highlight some of the details of the way that you can use this. Now, there's the metering mode can be worked in a more relaxed mode. This is normal, or if you do it in hyper mode, it will give you a lot more detail.
The way you looking, I didn't notice till then. Who you fooling?
Right, so you could kind of see it'll kind of linger a bit longer with the way that it works. So you could kind of, I'll go with the normal mode here for right now, just to give you a little bit more detail. So you can dive in on that whole end. There's the monitor section. This is important because as you're doing the work, you're going to want to be able to listen to the filters and exactly what you're doing. So you're going to see me going over here quite a bit. The solo section will solo up everything that you're processing. So when you set the filter, and everything operates around the main section. So if we set this to 100 hertz, when you solo, you will be listening to everything below 100 hertz. Based on the crossover or the filter steep, how steep the filter is, what order of filter. Sorry, I'll get my stuff together here. And so you'll hear the amount of information that you're actually working with, and then whether you mono it or make it wider, you'll hear all of that in detail. There's also ways to, when you're in the solo, you could solo up the mid signal hear what's going on there, solo up the side signal, hear what's going on. So again, this will listen only to the low frequency filter information and where it appears. Exactly. So this will be in place. The delta is different. This will be listening to just the processing that's being done. So this is the difference between the input signal and what processing is being done. So you could hear that. And then you could also hear pre, and the pre, if I have it soloed, I will hear the low end pre unprocessed as opposed to processed if I just hit the solo here. So it gives me all of those options. If I go to stereo, then I'll hear everything full frequency. So the way that you manage this ends up being important in terms of the way that you work with it. Everything starts with the main section here. So the main section here, we have our frequency selection. We have two different filter types. We have a bandpass filter, which allows us to narrow our frequency selection within a particular lane for processing. So in other words, maybe there's just a particular frequency zone that has some antiphase information that you want to correct, or maybe you want to mono or tighten up a bit. Then you could do it there and then pick how sharp the filters are around it. Is it sharp, so it occupies a very tight zone, or is it soft, where it occupies like a broader range of frequencies centered around a particular frequency? So that's one option. Or you could do the standard low pass thing, and then you have low pass filter options that go up to sixth order noise filter. So we have that. We have the frequency selection. Then what you do with it. So you can mono it up completely or any variation percentage in between, and you could also widen it up to 250%. So you can also use this as a way of adding width to synths and other things, but you can also do things on a more corrective level. Say when you get room mics for a drum kit and the kick drum sounds like it's out of phase between the two microphones that you have set up in the room, you could do some corrective work in there or center it a little bit more. So there's lots of other things that you can use this for aside from mastering, although that's the way I'm going to feature it. So we'll work with there. And then you have a gain control that does make up or make down gain based on what processing you apply. So this is the main section. We'll start here. Then there's a subfilter. The subfilter section is a filter that can be applied to the whole stereo signal or just to the sides. Now there's three different modes here. You could turn it off. If you go to the side signal, effectively this becomes a high pass filter in linear phase that will operate just on the side signal. So this would be one of the things I talked about in the beginning, which is just filtering off side information, low frequency. So you've got a lot of mud there, just want to clean it up a little bit, that would be the way to do it. If you go to stereo mode, it does not work in linear phase. So I'm not sure exactly why it's done that way, but there probably just are processing reasons for that, but this would apply it across the whole mix. And then there's a boost, which gives you an analog style resonant filter. So what this will do is it'll give you a little bit of a bump and across the full spectrum, left, for if you're thinking about it mid-side, both mid and side, right? So for the full stereo signal. And again, it's not a linear phase filter. Okay, so the only one you get the linear phase filter for is the side adjustment. You can make this a soft filter, which changes it from 18 dB per octave to 6 dB per octave. So that's what the soft switch does. And you can apply it either pre-processing here or post-processing. So when the signal comes in, it goes through an input gain control, right? There's an output gain control on the other end. You can actually adjust them here. If you hold the shift key, you can simultaneously raise one and lower the other by the exact same amount, right? So that's like a handy way to just kind of make a level adjustment just for the processing to sort of drive into it, because there's also a limiter in here, so it works in conjunction with that as well. But it gives us the ability to, right after this, it will come in pre, and if we select the post button, then it will go after all of the processing. Okay, so this filter ends up being important because this filter affects the other sections, particularly the stereo harmonic section, where you can generate artificial harmonics, and I'll show you how that's helpful, and also a dynamic section that works below the cutoff filter, or if you're using bandpass within the bandpass filter, that dynamics will work within there. So you have dynamics for compression and expansion. You have harmonics, which can help to fill out missing ambient information that you're taking away by monoing up the signals, low frequencies to the center, you can sort of recreate these harmonics that exist outward on the sides that allow you to sort of pick up some of that lost energy. And it doesn't matter if that gets canceled. It gives you a little bit of an enhancement for those who do have a full frequency stereo speaker system or full set of headphones and they want to hear that full width, which may be really important to the mix. Okay, so let's see. There's a mono recovery. The mono recovery is an interesting one because what happens is, and often when you get these wide basses, they're usually are modulating back and forth, right? So you're getting either some sort of chorus type effect or some kind of modulation effect that goes back and forth. And so essentially what this is doing is when you sum those together, you often end up with odd information in the middle, right? So what it will do is it will kind of prioritize and allow you to correct to some degree. I'm going to kind of couch this a little bit because it's not correcting the phase, but what it's doing with the three different settings here is it's giving the ability to bring in the low frequency information that is out on the side, bring it into the middle without it being phase canceled by the anti-phase information that's on the other side. So if you use the auto, what it does is it will auto detect where it detects the most strength for low frequency energy, and it will prioritize that for the center information. It does still include some of that's what's on the other side, but it does so in a different way. It prioritizes one side over the other, and this will then operate. So if you have a speed control, which allows you to adapt how fast it attacks. If you have something that's moving back and forth very rapidly, you would go fast speed. If you have something that's just sort of resonating very slowly, you could go to a slower speed and kind of feel that out. Then if you have something like, for example, where you have a low tom or something that is just hitting that's pent like hard left or hard right, then you can just have it override and do a prioritization of the low frequency signal in that and pull that to the center. So the idea here is that it's preventing anti-phase information from the other side from canceling or shifting the tonal quality or character of the signal as it sums it to mono. And then, of course, you have the percentage control. So you can see how deep this is going. And then there's also a delay control, which allows you to take the information that's on the other side, right, from what you selected here. So if you select right on the left-hand side, you can mix in some of that information delayed, which may give you the ability to phase correct what's going on. Use with caution. Then there is a harmonic section. So as I mentioned before, this allows you to regenerate harmonics based off the original program material below the filtered frequency. And it will there are three different modes: second and third harmonic, even and odd, which ripples up a little bit higher, or crunchy, which I think gives you a bit more of a even order, right? Whichever one is edgier. So you got those three types. I could be wrong about that. You can apply the signal or take the source signal from the mid channel, from the full stereo mix, or just from the sides. And then you could decide how much of it. So this will determine how much the saturation is. And then you could decide how you want to spread it out. It gets pretty crazy, right? So then you could decide how much of it that you want to mix in. So this gives you the ability to kind of regenerate some lost ambient energy that you might get just by summing things down to mono or to a center channel. Then there's also a compression, and what this does is the compressor allows you to even out that harmonic energy so it doesn't draw too far forward. It just kind of maintains a little bit more of a consistent backspace to give you that sense of space without sounding artificial, and then a level to balance that in. Whew. On the dynamic section end here, what we have is a whole section here that allows us to control the dynamics of the side information. And a lot of this, with either compression or expansion, is the movement of the side information, low frequency side information, again, below the filtered frequency here, how it moves going back and forth between the sides and the center. So it gives you the ability, for example, to move the attack low end to the center, but let the information sort of bleed out to the sides as the sustain kind of goes on. As I told you, this is deep. And there's a limiter on here. which you can operate. So this would give you the ability to do a limiter which is targeted towards those sub frequencies, again below the filter frequency here. Although the more you limit, the more that limiting starts to bleed up into the higher frequency. So it's not exclusive to that end. A lot of control here for the low end. All right, so enough talking. Let's get to some audio examples here. So let's start with a simple basic thing. All of these things are off for right now. So let's just start with the main section here. And what I'm going to do is I just want to solo up something here just so we can set our crossover point here. Now I could set my filter order. Right, so I could really target it if I want to. So the idea of setting a softer filter here allows you to kind of bleed it in so it sort of fans out rather than being hard center and then cutting hard left and right at a particular frequency. So that the way that it fans out is shaped here by the order noise filter that you select. So, so let's start right there. I ended up right there, which is right about what a typical consumer crossover is for a sub, would be like somewhere around 125. All right, so I could set that. Again, there's also the bandpass mode, right? So this would give me, and this would be centered on that frequency, but I can move it in. Now, looking at the meter, I could sort of see where my antiphase information is, and most of it is existing in this 30 to 120 area, right? So, you know, I'll stay with my low pass filter here, right there. Okay, that's the corner frequency of it at 6 dB per octave, right? So let's see what happens here.
I didn't notice till then who you fooling, 'cause I don't believe your lies no more when you're talking. I just know you're clowning. Who you fooling, 'cause I don't believe your lies no more. You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could.
So you could see there when I go to 48 how it more starkly grabs the signal, right? So I'm going to go back to 12 because I think I want to let it kind of fan out a little bit, not be so tight, super tight. And I'm not going to make it all the way wide here. So let's play around with this a little bit.
The way you looking, I didn't notice till then who you fooling, 'cause I don't believe your lies no more when you're talking. I just know you're clowning. Who you fooling, 'cause I don't believe your lies no more. You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and cheat ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
All right, so I got a good amount of focus here on it. Probably a little bit more than what I was, necessarily going for. But let's kind of roll with that just for right now so we could hear it. The other thing that we could do here, if we just start with, with this section here, would be to go to the sub filter here. I'm going to leave it prior to everything. We could also put it post all of the other processing. But let's just let's see if I can kind of round off the low end. This is just sort of fun. So this will operate on the full stereo signal, but it'll give me a little bit of a resonant boost on the low end. And I could solo it up to listen to it.
I just know you're clowning. Who you fooling, 'cause I don't believe your lies no more. You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and cheat ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
Right, so that would allow me to create a resonant bump, sort of an analog style resonance at the bottom, and this is just how big that resonance is. And of course, I could do this just to the side information here. So let's just check that out.
The way you looking, I didn't notice till then who you fooling, 'cause I don't believe your lies no more when
right, so we could hear that tidied up right there. I'm going to cue up to that chorus section right there because it gives me a little bit of a tighter, little more prominent bass there.
You're trying, you lost me.
That works. All right, so we could take or leave that. I prefer that over the boost. So I'm just going to leave a little bit of that in there. And then let's just focus a little bit on this mono recovery thing. So again, there's not a ton of anti-phase, but if we felt like we were losing something, after summing this together, this is where we could just sort of bring a little bit of it back in, sort of bring in a little bit more of the solidity. So let's see if we can do something here.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you're chasing, she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell. You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell.
So I'm not sure if this is just bringing up the bass at this point, but it's certainly making it clearer. I think I probably want to make this a little bit faster in terms of the response, but I can solo it up here to sort of listen to it a little bit better. Again, because there's no specific right or left information that would make me go to that and use that as a priority for pulling to the center, I'll just let it kind of work on its own. And just because of the pace of the bass, it seems like that kind of grabs onto it a little bit more, just to make the bass a bit more defined. So let's just check that out. Just compare that just with what we've done here so far.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you're chasing, she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell. You make me feel.
One more time.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you're chasing, she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
Okay, so that helps a lot to focus the bass and kind of give it a little bit more, give it much more kind of centered solidness, right? So you could feel it a bit more, but we're losing a bit of the ambient information. So I want to try to see if I can draw some of that out here with the harmonics. So let's see. So if I use a second and third harmonic, it's going to stay a little bit lower in the spectrum, only the second and third. So that would bring it up into the, if our cutoff is 124, then that would be feeding in. And so it would be going up into, low mid frequencies. This would go up a little bit higher. This would go up even higher, give us some crunch. But let's focus on this a little bit here. We're not going to hear enough with the delta there. So what this is doing is it's grabbing the, I'm just going to do the side information. It's grabbing the side information prior to all of this other processing, although it does follow the crossover points in terms of the actual generation of the harmonic information. So where I drive it ends up being important here, because if I drive it all to the sides, it'll have like a little bit of width. So let's see how much we can get away with there. There's also a dampen thing. This is like a basically a very soft roll off of the high frequencies, right? So that gives us some control over where the harmonics are occurring, right? Or how far up they go or ripple up. And then the compression, which allows us to kind of tighten it in. So let's see if we can dial this in.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell.
just to give it just so you hear it a bit more aggressive.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me. Don't believe it.
Right, so I could work at just the stereo. Maybe that works a little bit better.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
So this will give me a little bit more of that depth and body that's missing from the ambient energy. So I could just kind of mix that in to whatever degree I want, just so I don't lose, like, dry everything up a bit too much.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
Okay, and finally, or almost finally, penultimately, I guess, is the dynamic section. So again, the dynamic section works on the filtered frequency area below here. And then there are ways of operating this where I can get some movement between, depending upon whether I want to expand the low end on the sustain or whether I want to draw it in towards the middle. So, for example, like I'm a little bit off. I'm not all the way monoed up here. In fact, I probably want to relax it just a little bit. But let's just start with this here. So what I have here is a threshold. So this triggers gain reduction or the compression or expansion. I have the amount, which is like, do I want compression or do I want expansion? You'll see gain reduction here or gain expansion going here. And then the release characteristic. Do I want it slow or fast? So one example of what I could do here, for example, is to work with the stereo signal. And let me just sort of expand the low end to just sort of drive it a little bit.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
Right, so effectively this is pumping that low frequency energy. Right, so I could use that as an expander just to sort of make that feel a bit more, give it a little bit more depth, a little bit more movement. Let me take the solo out.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
Okay, so we have that option. The other option is that I can work the sides and I can compress the sides. That would be one other way of working with this. And I probably would use a slower release.
You're trying.
So I have to go lower in threshold, obviously. So that little white dot is sort of the RMS of the compression, right? Where you see the more active part with the blue gain reduction level. Right, so that's sort of suppressing side information, drawing it to the center, and then letting it sort of go out a little bit wider. Right, so if I make a zero here, we'll see hear that low frequency energy. It's hard to hear it go sort of widen as it goes out. So let's see what this sounds like.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
So I think I prefer of the two up here, kind of pumping that low end a little bit.
You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
All right, so let me just put that in there for a second. All right, so let's go back and let's just kind of A/B this in and out through these two sections just to get an overview of it here.
The way you looking, I didn't notice till then. Who you fooling? 'Cause I don't believe your lies no more when you're talking. I just know you're clowning. Who you fooling? 'Cause I don't believe your lies no more. You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell. You make me feel love like on your best stuff.
Great. So amazing the way that it works. There's also a limiter on the back end. We could try that. There's also a feature here, whereas if you shift click here, it will raise the output level as you pull the limiter gain down, right? And that does not affect there. So there's kind of a cool little shortcut there. And then you could just right click to bypass it to make it go back. So let's just bring the limiter down here and see if this helps at all.
The way you looking, I didn't notice till then. Who you fooling? 'Cause I don't believe your lies no more when you're talking. I just know you're clowning. Who you fooling? 'Cause I don't believe your lies no more. You're trying, you lost me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell.
Especially with some of the pumping movement and everything with the expanding of the low end, that acts as like a nice little cap on it to kind of contain it a little bit. As you can see, there's just like an impossible number of options here in terms of the way that you work. And obviously you don't have to use everything the way that I'm demonstrating it here. Just use it with what you need to. But there's just a tremendous amount under the hood of this thing, and it's worth really digging into. Super powerful beyond anything that I've ever seen anywhere in terms of control of low end, and coupled with the Unison, which is Tone Project's mastering compressor, which is where this dynamics comes from. It's basically just cutting off the low frequency, basically multi-banding it and using that technology, a very, very, very simplified version of it down here. Just incredible detail, right? And power. Yeah, this is like when I first got this, I immediately redid 3 mastering projects that I had been working on. And that's no lie. Threw this on there, started playing around with it, was getting amazing results right away, and then that came out. This is always the most difficult thing to manage, is the balance of the low end and its place. And I've obviously exaggerated some things here for the purposes of demonstration, but it's a super powerful unit and absolutely worth checking out and having in your toolkit, particularly if you're mastering. Loads of creative ways that you can use it in mixing as well. Way too much for this demo. But there you have it. Plugin of the week from Tone Projects. It's really awesome. Basslane Pro. Pick it up, and you won't be disappointed.